for tuning in to No Sudden Moves Radio. And remember, stay on the proven path so you don't risk falling behind. Here at Business Legends, we don't overthink it. Look around and see what everyone else is doing. If it's working for them, it will work for you.
Welcome to Wait It Out, where we believe there's no reason to act now. The opportunity will still be there when the timing is better.
The age of disruption isn't coming, it's here. And the boldest move isn't following the crowd, it's following your why. I'm Patrick Ledden, and you're listening to Disruption Lab. Hey folks, welcome to Disruption Lab. I'm Patrick Ledden, and on this podcast, we explore how people navigate disruption in ways that lead not just to performance, but to a genuinely good life. Today's guest is Amy Leneker, a person who knows a lot about leading a genuinely good life. She's a leadership consultant. She's the founder of the Center for Joyful Work and the author of the book, Cheers to Monday, the surprisingly simple method to lead and live with less stress and more joy. Amy's work challenges something that many of us, myself probably, quietly accept, that stress is simply the price of ambition. Instead, Amy argues that joy isn't soft, it isn't optional, it isn't even indulgent, it's strategic, it's sustainable, and it may be one of the most disruptive choices you can make. In a world that often confuses busyness with value, Amy invites us to rethink what it means to live and lead well. Amy, welcome to the show. So glad to have you here today.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. It's great to see you.
It's great to see you too. I noticed when I was doing some research for the conversation today that you described yourself as a recovering workaholic. Could you tell us a little bit about the moment when you realized that the definition you were using for success maybe wasn't quite getting you there?
Absolutely. It is a memory that is painfully seared in my brain. It was just after my 40th birthday, and I had finally gotten my dream job, the job I had worked my entire career to get, and I was absolutely miserable. And I burned out in a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad way, and to the point where my body actually shut down. I was unable to work. And that was the final aha moment that my overwork had gotten completely out of control.
You know, that age around 40 is an interesting one. I think I kind of hit a similar moment at 40. It wasn't necessarily where I shut down around ability to do work. I just realized my relationships were kind of crumbling around me. And I wrote about it in a book I wrote where my wife I put the garage door up and she said, "We need to talk about our relationship." Yeah. So it was one of those moments where there's this reckoning that sits out there for us. And I don't know if we just feel sometimes that we're invincible, or we're just got our head buried in the sand, or we just don't live a life where that we value that. But for a lot of us, there probably is listening to the podcast, there's this day of reckoning perhaps out there, and maybe we can get out in front of it. And other ones we're like, yeah, we went through that, we paid a price. But I'd love to hear kind of, what'd you do?
And I was just going to say, I think it's so great the way that your wife shared. I mean, it was probably a really hard conversation, but what I also find is that it's often people outside of us who are the ones to recognize it first, who are the ones to say, gosh, is this really the way that you want it to be? So for me, I did what any introverted research nerd would do, and I just dove deep into the research. So that was my way of, I think in some ways, Patrick, it was my way of really understanding, but also a way of avoiding, because research can be a great avoidance tool. So I read everything I could get my hands on. I started interviewing and doing focus groups with leaders and teams, really trying to figure out what is it that we're doing wrong. We've never invested more money or more time or more energy in wellness programs at work, and yet stress levels are not moving in the right direction. So I wanted to figure out, why is that, and what in the world can we do instead?
Well, it's interesting as you say that about investing money in these programs, because it almost seems like, and you're closer to this than I am, but like the age of well-being or talking about well-being at work is almost starting to fall off a little bit. We talked about it for, especially, period of COVID and kind of leading into that disruptive moment of COVID, well-being became more and more something on the radar. And at some point, it seems like we've gone, well, that was just an investment into something that we did during a specific time, as opposed to going, no, that's actually can be an accelerant for our success. And if you take the one off ramp, you kind of go away from investing in well-being because you don't see what you consider to be the return on investment. I just love to hear you kind of just, am I right? Is that what you're seeing?
Yes, I think you're exactly right. And I think it's multi-layered. So I think a lot of organizations are saying, we've invested all of this money, we've done the trainings, we've got you the wellness app, we've got yoga here on Fridays at noon. Why aren't you happy? And what we know from the data is that people aren't stress-free. And in fact, I'm sure you've seen the same research that I have, that now our stress levels are where they were at the very beginning of the pandemic. So what's fascinating to me when I go into organizations, they are stressed from talking about stress. They're burnout from talking about burnout. They don't want to do it anymore. They've been doing it, like you said, since COVID. But we don't have the luxury to not talk about it. We don't get the ability to say, we're just not going to talk about stress and burnout any longer. But what I think we can do is flip the conversation and start talking about joy, because there's an intersection there that I think is the key to making things better.
Yeah, what do you think is kind of the misconception maybe about the word joy and joy and stress and the relationship between them? What do you think is kind of the misconceptions we have out there on it?
The most common one that I've heard, and it's one that I believed, was that joy is something that comes after stress. We have to get through whatever the stressful period is, or we have to get through the stressful project, and then we're going to feel some joy. And that was certainly how I was approaching my life. It was always something that I was delaying or postponing. And yet the research says the opposite. The research says that it's actually joy that helps us sustain the difficult times. It's joy that creates this buffer. And in the national workforce study that I just wrapped up, we found that 75% of American workers say joy helps them mitigate workplace stress. That's a lot. So 3/4 of people are saying, yes, I need joy in order to help me mitigate workplace stress.
So I'm gonna use myself as the guinea pig here. Maybe
Yeah.
some other people listening to this can relate to this, but there's some
Yeah.
things about me that appear to be just wired in, or environmentally they've been built into me over time. If I go to eat a meal and there's 5 items on the plate, I'll eat the ones I don't like first, and I'll work myself to the one I do like. If
Yeah.
I'm listening to the radio and there's a song I like, I might go look to see if there's a better song. I don't want to miss it, type of thing. If I have work to do and it's like there's tasks I like and tasks I don't like, I always do
Yes.
the tasks I don't like first.
Yep.
It's almost like I have to like pay the dues to earn something. Now, my wife, her doctoral studies were all on gratitude, and she would kind of like try to help me reframe it. And actually, the book I wrote with James Patterson, when we get into this like moments, not in the book itself, but just in the moments of writing a book, you know how it is writing books, right? It can be tough sometimes. He'd always be like, Patrick, you have a choice. Do you want to drink from the cup of grief or the cup of joy? And I'd be like, well, now that you put it that way, give me the cup of joy.
It's
But
pretty easy choice.
yeah, it seems easy, but I just don't sometimes do it. And I'm an N of one, but there's probably other people that out there doing the same thing. This like deferred sense of joy, or joy is just you have to earn your right to get to that, or pay the price to get to that, or whatever, deal with the drudgery, and then you'll eventually maybe get to that mountaintop.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I call those joy stories. So the same way that we all have stress stories about where does stress come from, how much should I tolerate, how do I get through it, we all have joy stories too. And some of those came from our families, some come from our culture, some come from our workplaces, about what we believe about joy. Is joy something I have to earn? Is joy something that I have a right to every day? So the same way that we have to question our stories about stress, we have to also question our stories about joy. And it sounds like that's exactly what you were doing, which is this serving me well?
Yeah.
Is this sense of delaying it? Is this giving me the life that I want? And if not, then I can rewrite my joy story. I get to shift that so that it fits something that builds the life that I want.
Yeah, it's really interesting because you think about like the story of your life. When you hit the moment, you said around 40, where you're like, this is shutdown mode hitting me right now. Did you find that you rewrote like what is this, or kind of re-envision what the story of your life would be? Or do you think you reconnected to what you wanted it to be many years ago? and you've been telling yourself kind of a false narrative, or sometimes we get caught between the living life we want and living the life we think other people want us to live.
For me, I think it was a little bit of both. And there was a 10-word question that completely changed my life. And it sent me on an unraveling journey. And I was in my doctor's office, like I described, because I was there. I was being treated for burnout, being treated for all the signs of stress. And my doctor wanted to see me every week. So I was there, I was on my 7th week, and I was filling out the same checklist I'd had to fill out the previous 7 weeks. But this time there was a second page. And on the second page was the question, what are your hobbies? What do you do for fun? And I had no answer. I could not think of a single thing that I did for fun. I could think of things I did for my kids to have fun. I knew how my husband wanted to have fun, but I had no idea what I did for fun. And I finally made it out to the car. I call my husband. I'm sobbing. I'm like, why didn't you tell me I'm not any fun? And he's like, Amy, you're the funnest person I know. And at that moment, I had just read an article about the word funnest and the derivative of the word, and I almost shared it with him. And then I'm like, that's not what a fun person would do. So I didn't say that. But it really sent me down this whole journey of how did I lose myself? How did I get to the point where I don't know what I do for fun? And it was a question that broke my heart, but it actually ended up healing my heart. Because over the next several months and leading into the next year, I really started to reconnect, like you were saying, to pieces of me from before, and then also being open to pieces that were brand new.
I imagine how many people have this kind of moment in the parking lot. I reminded of, I don't know if you know who Karen Dillon is or listeners do, but there's this lady named Karen Dillon I've become friends with, who she wrote a book called How Will You Measure Your Life with Clayton Christensen, the well-known writer on innovation. And and they talk about in the book this story where she listened to him give a lecture at Harvard to students about what do you get a value in life. And by the time she hit the parking lot, she was like, I'm going in the wrong direction. In her case, she felt like she got her dream job. She was in the right place and all of those type of things. And then suddenly realized this isn't right. I would imagine that people feel this a lot.
I see it all the time. I heard it through interviews. I heard it in focus groups. And what I think is really interesting is that I'm Gen X. So I think for folks in my generation, we had this looking back, this moment like you described. Your friend is walking out of a lecture and realizes this isn't what I want. And I think younger generations are approaching it differently. I think instead of having this retrospective look, they're having this forward look of, is this what I want to build? So I think in many ways they're ahead of us in that regard.
Well, I hope so. I think that'd be great. That'd be great for them as well as just kind of all of us if they happen to feel that way in that place. For someone listening who feels successful on paper, but maybe underneath it, not so much, or a little restless, where do they start?
I would first start by saying you're not alone. So in the study that we just wrapped up, almost 3/4 of working Americans say that they've had that experience, that I have felt successful at work. I have felt successful on paper, and yet I don't feel successful outside of that. So number one is to just say you're not alone. And then I think the second step is to do what it sounds like you've done and I've done and so many other people have done, which is really starting to evaluate, where am I? What is bringing me joy? What is this the life that I really want to be living? And if not, then what are those small changes we can start with on the edges to get a little closer to where we want to be?
As you were thinking about this concept and working on the idea of joy and work, and we came up with the book. I love the title, Cheers to Monday. When you're writing something like that, oftentimes you're thinking about who's going to read this someday, and the someday's here. Congratulations, the someday's here. So who do you see reading this, and what do you hope that they get from it?
What I really hope is that this book starts new conversations in workplaces around what it means to be successful at work. And so often books are read by leaders and CEOs, but they miss the other people in the organization. And my hope is that this book becomes a conversation starter in entire organizations. It's actually broken up into whether or not you manage or whether you don't, or whether you're on a team, so it's designed because the only way this works is if everybody has the same goal. And what I see right now a lot of, and it's heartbreaking, is there's a lot of finger pointing. There's a lot of finger pointing that I'm just waiting for leadership to make it better. And leadership is blaming people for it not showing up the way they want. And if we can get out of that, if we can get out of the shame and blame and all come together, then I think we have a much better shot at building work that really works.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting to approach it that way because you're right. A lot of books might be written to senior leaders, executive leaders. Something might be written to board members. Something might
Yes.
be written to middle management or to team leaders. Or if something might be written to frontline employees, which tends to be more productivity related content, like how to specifically do particular tasks more productively. But for this one, I could see, boy, you're talking about joy. I could see some leaders saying, "Oh, that sounds great, but I don't want to open this up to my people." But I bet you're telling me that there's a return on joy that we often do, because we know from our conversation so far at the individual level,
Yes.
sure. But what about collectively?
There is a huge return on joy. And I'm so glad that the data showed that because I thought, boy, this is going to be a tough sell otherwise. But it's not uncommon for me to be pitching a meeting or in an exploratory call with an executive leader and have them say, with all due respect, we're not that interested in joy. We don't really have time for joy. I've been told it's fluffy. I've been told it's touchy-feely. I've been told it's woo-woo. And none of that is true. There are direct connections between the amount of joy we feel at work and our work outcomes. And what's so interesting, the brand new data shows that 79%, that's a lot. So just under 80% of working Americans say, I need joy in order to do my best work. And that number jumped to 89% for executives. So now when I'm in with an executive leader and they're saying, frankly, I'm not that interested in joy, I can say, well, you may not be, but chances are 89% of your colleagues are. So let's talk about how we can really understand joy, not to be malicious or not to leverage it, or actually to leverage it, but to do it in a positive way, to really understand all the benefits that can come from it.
So do I need like just a little taste of joy occasionally to keep me going? Do I can like a camel, I can hang on to this for a while? Do I need a constant, sprinkler or water hose? When we say like experiencing it, what is that? How's it operationalized, I guess?
So here's what I found. There are 3 conditions that allow for joy at work. And if you have just one of them, you are likely to feel joy. If you've got 2 of them, you're more likely. And if you've got all 3 of them, you've now created the perfect recipe for allowing joy to come in. So the first one is meaning and purpose. And I know that this connects directly to your heart and to your work, that I know that there's a reason why I do what I do. The second was mattering in our relationships, that I go to work and there is someone who cares about me. The third one, this one surprised me. It's when there's momentum in our progress. And so when I sit with leaders and I have them think about an example of any one of those 3 categories, they'll say, yeah, I did feel joy. And sometimes it's just if you think about the mattering in our relationships, it can be a 2-minute check-in with a coworker or having a quick coffee chat or meaning and purpose or momentum. So we can have it in any of the 3, but when we create the conditions for all 3 to be there, then joy it's more likely than not to show up.
And I can see why. I mean, some leaders might be like, I'm really mostly concerned with momentum. If I'm seeing the scoreboard move in the right direction, that's
right.
awesome. If my people get some additional benefit beyond it, that's fine. But I can
Exactly.
also see other ones going, you know what? It's a kind of a two-sided coin here. I need results, but I also need to care about my people, because care about them can foster these other things. Is there a cumulative effect to it, do you think, or is there almost like a multiplying effect to it?
I think there's absolutely a compounding effect. In the same way that stress compounds, joy absolutely compounds. And you can see it. You can see that ripple effect, the way that just because as humans, our emotions are contagious. And so I think there absolutely is a visible compound a reaction that you can see and a result that you can see.
Now, when you think about stress, because I know that's another component of this, is
Yeah.
I was always told like not all stress is bad. There's different kinds of stress. Could you kind of tell us a little bit about that? Because I'm sure some people are going, hey, am I supposed to just whack-a-mole every moment of stress or not have any of it? Because that's not my world. I have stress. It's going to creep up.
I'm so glad you asked it, because it's one of the most common misconceptions that I hear is when everyone thinks that all stress is created equal. And it's not. It's exactly what you said. There is good stress, and that's called eustress. And then there's the not so good stress, which is called distress. And where we get in trouble in organizations is where we don't have a shared language about those two things. So here's a great example. I'm working with a leader, and he was telling his team how stress is a good thing. And he said, I wouldn't be where I am without stress. Stress is what helps me get up every day and run this company. Well, his team was feeling distress. They weren't feeling the motivational, the one that helps me perform. They were feeling the opposite. They were feeling the one that actually makes you perform less. And so without that shared language, they were completely talking past each other. So what I tell leaders you can do, it's just a simple question. Is that stress helping you, or is it hurting you? That is all you need to know of whether or not you are in eustress or distress.
How much of that stress, and maybe the answer could be none, Patrick, what are you talking about? But how much of that stress might be, I feel stressed because I see the same situation or problem or issue my leader sees, but I don't feel like I have any agency here. I don't feel like I can do anything about that. In other words, how much of that stress is being shaped by the environment that actually the leader's creating?
A lot. And we know that because in my work, I call that system stress. I call that the stress of the system you're operating in every day. And 80% of people said they feel it every week. So to answer your question, a lot. And it's, can we go into work and create these little bubbles where we try to be how we're going to be regardless of the environment around us? Sure, but it's exhausting. And it's really hard to sustain that over time.
Yeah, that makes sense. I can even think, like, when I think about meaning and mattering and momentum, I can imagine that there might be two teams in the same organization, maybe even the same division or the same business unit, that ultimately report to the same people, but because one is creating a bit of a bubble around themselves, or protect, or maybe even their team leaders giving them a little oxygen to thrive, they're able to, find meaning and how they matter and one another, matter to one another, and momentum. And at the same time, a team just adjacent to them can't. And at some point, you have to go, okay, what's going on here? And a lot of it probably is what the environment, the culture, whatever terminology we want to use, that they're existing within, that's causing the challenge.
Exactly. And I think it brings home what we've known for years about just how impactful the relationship is with someone's manager. And we've known that for decades. There's dozens of books that are written about how much that impact, or how much of an impact that relationship has. And when I asked in our survey if you could do one thing to have less stress and more joy at work, the number one, without a close second, was about their manager.
Yeah.
What they wanted more of, what they wanted their manager to do less of. So to answer your question, I just don't think we can underscore the importance of that relationship and the impact that relationship has.
It's a hard thing, though, to say, like, and I get where people might say that, but if I could do one thing, I would change this other person, but
I know.
right. But at the end of the day, changing someone else is really tough. So at the end of the day, it's got to be like me work,
Yes.
as opposed to someone else's work. Is that fair?
It is. And that's what gives me so much hope about starting new conversations around stress and joy, that it's less about shaming and blaming, and it's more about saying, how do we co-create this environment? How do we co-create something where we can show up every day and do good work and feel good about what we do, and then go back home at the end of our day into our families and our communities and have the energy to be the best version of ourselves.
Okay, so that's the perfect setup, because I want to go there. So
Yeah.
theoretically, on paper, I might spend 8 hours a day at work, 8 hours a day sleeping if I was fortunate, and 8 hours of the day commuting, being around the dinner table if I have one of those, like living the rest of my life, and maybe some more time on the weekends. So let's talk about the value of getting this right at work, how much it relates to home, and the value of trying to work to get this right at home, right? I mean, I don't want people just to find joy at work and no joy at home, or feel like, this home situation is not that great, so I should just spend more time at work. That's kind of probably messing the equation up too. I just love to hear, like, it's one life.
Absolutely. There is a ripple effect. There's no question. And I think for many years we've gotten it wrong when we've tried to compartmentalize our lives. We've tried to create this arbitrary separation between who we are at work and how we are outside of work. And it just doesn't exist, because one impacts the other. And one of the most striking things I found in my research was the number of people who say that when I'm stressed at work, I bring it home with me. And when I feel joy at work, I bring it home with me. And we're talking about a lot. We're talking about 3/4 of people who say that these emotions are carrying with me wherever I go. And so there's so much incentive to get it right. I'm a certified mediator. I specialize in workplace conflict, and I think this story sums it up so beautifully. I was doing a mediation just a few weeks ago, and I knew it was hard. By the time they bring me in, the conflict is tough. You don't bring in a mediator if it's not hard. And so I was doing my one-on-one interview and trying to really understand what the impact was on him. And he was being very stoic and very calm and just very, very clear and concise. And then I said, if I were talking to the person who loved you most in the world, what would they say the impact of this conflict is on you? And then he burst into tears. And I thought, oh God, I wasn't trying to make you cry. But the point is that sometimes it's only through the lens of the people who love us that we're able to see what the impact is of work. And that was exactly what happened with that leader when he started describing how his wife was talking about how he had changed. I think it becomes really clear.
I'm thinking about that. Like, let's say, for example, that somebody's listening and there's 4 people in their family. Maybe there's husband, wife, couple kids, some type of configuration where there's 4 people in their family, and everybody goes off and does their thing every day. So maybe a couple people go to school, a couple people go to work, whatever that might be. Or maybe a couple people stay at home and they find joy or stress at home in the things that they're doing there. But at the end of the day, these 4 people come back together in the home underneath one roof, maybe around one dinner table, whatever it might be. And some are bringing joy home with them, and some are bringing stress home with them, and all might be bringing stress, all might be bringing joy. I mean, all bringing joy sounds like a wonderful thing, but that's probably not what's happening at every table. What would you say? Like, okay, let's say, for example, I came home and I said, I'm being fed at work. I come home and I'm joyful. I'm finding meaning. I'm finding that what I do matters. The relationships I have matter, and that we're delivering things that are driving momentum. The 3 M's are being satisfied,
Yeah.
but the other people around my table aren't so much. What can I bring them in the moment that might help them? Beyond saying, like, go work on your resume, or let's change schools, or whatever it might be, which might be the right conversation at some point to have. But maybe before that, what can I do to help them out a little bit?
I think you can bring a lot. So I think even what you described, just that idea of being true to what the experiences that you're having, I think in those moments, that's the most important thing you can do. It makes me think of Anne Lamott, who writes that lighthouses don't go running all over an island looking for boats to save. They just stand there shining. And what you're describing, to me, that was the metaphor that popped up, that sometimes the most important thing you can do is stand there having really being in a good place yourself, as almost witnessing what other people can have an opportunity for. I think where we get in trouble, and where I see it over and over and over again in the research, is that the tip over to toxic positivity is not a little one. And people with really good intentions, trying to say stay positive, good vibes only, if we tip over into that toxic positivity, we are having the exact opposite effect of what we want. Trust is going to go down, disconnection gets weakened. So it's to do what you described. How can I be in this moment without trying to fix it with some type of forced positivity?
Yeah, I think one of the best things I ever figured out over the course of time was, like, with my wife, for example, is like when she's sharing something with me, to basically either figure out or even ask, so I'm not guessing and guessing wrong. What do you need from me right now? How can I best be there for you? And many times it was just listen. Don't try to solve this thing. You're not dealing with it the same way I am. Just I want somebody who listens and to know that that you care. And in many ways, for me, that was like, okay, good. I don't have to solve this thing, because once you get into that, let me tell you what to do mode. It's just people can get
Yes.
defensive, and it just happens to us as part of our routine, our some of our mechanisms that come into place. You talked about the national study you just did. Tell us a little bit about that, because I want to ask people at the end to go check it out.
Sure, it is the state of stress and joy at work. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of stories or of studies on stress at work, and there are fewer, but still some really good ones on joy at work. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to study the intersection between the two. So how does one impact the other? How does one drive the other? How does one prevent the other? So that's what this study aimed to do, was to really separate the myth from the truth about stress and joy.
Oh, I love
And
that.
there is a myth that is alive and well in organizations that joy is frivolous. Joy is a nice to have, and it's simply not true. It is a need to have. It is a need to have in order to have a really thriving organization.
So at the end of every podcast episode here in the Disruption Lab, like a lot of podcasts, we have kind of our question we ask at the end. It actually came from me getting into such a routine in life that my producer Jess said, "Why don't you disrupt that routine?" And my routine was I would always go whenever I traveled or I was out somewhere. I'd always look for the same coffee shop. Yeah, it has a green logo, some lady out of the sea, and I would get my exact same drink. And I did that all the time. And she said to me, "Why don't you go some other places?" And I was like, "Well, what if they don't have the same consistent drink?"
Right.
And she's like, "Maybe it's better. Maybe you go find a better drink." So I am in the pursuit of the perfect vanilla latte, which means I break my routine. I disrupt my routine.
Wonderful.
So is there a drink that either A, you're in the pursuit of the perfect version of that drink, or B, you've already found it? And if so, what is it?
Boy, I think I'm in the B camp. There's nothing that brings me more joy in the moment than an iced decaf non-fat white mocha.
Do you go somewhere to get it or do you make it?
Same place with the green logo.
You know what? That place is doing well because of you and me.
I know. Yeah.
But you know what? It brings me a little joy.
Me too.
I went to one today and I felt like I was so
I did too.
seen and present in that
Cheers.
moment.
Yeah,
Actually,
nice.
yeah, awesome. So you and I are $16 poorer, but
That's
we
right.
have a little bit of joy in our life. Well, Amy, thank you so much for
Oh,
joining me. Thanks for sharing your insight on joy. I think you've given our listeners really something to listen to and a study to go check out. I'll tell people where to find that and a book to pick up. And I just really appreciate the opportunity to share some time with you today.
oh, thank you. It was my pleasure.
Well, hey, folks, if you want to go deeper into Amy's work, check out her book, Cheers to Monday. It's a practical and encouraging guide for anyone who wants to lead and live with less stress and more joy. I also encourage you to check out her new research study, The State of Stress and Joy at Work. You'll find a link in the show notes to find that. And as always, I'd love to hear from you. At patrickledden.com, you can share your story in writing or video about how you are working to live your good life in the face of disruption. We're building a community of people who are choosing clarity over chaos and purpose over pressure. Thanks for listening to the Disruption Lab. Until next time, stay curious and choose your disruptions wisely.